Um, and I was thinking about it. To me, she is not just a Catholic saint. She is beyond that. She is a true mystic. And what I mean by mystic is just someone, an individual who is on fire to know the truth of their own nature, and the truth about God, and the reality that we live in. And a mystic is not someone who is satisfied with beliefs, right? That for them, the beliefs that they learn are fine. They're a starting point, but they want to go beyond that to what we refer to as realization. Means the inner knowing, the deep knowing. That's why many traditions like Buddhism and Zen and Hinduism, different aspects of Hinduism, they use the word self-realization. So they're not talking about just absorbing beliefs and teachings. They're talking about realization through different practices, through different techniques, maybe meditation, maybe deep prayer, different ways of communing with God. And so this is just for me. This is how I think of a mystic, and there are mystics in every tradition, right? You know, you have your mystics in Buddhism and Zen, and as I said, the Sufi tradition, in Islamic tradition, and in many Christian and Catholic traditions. Okay, there's mystics throughout, and these are folks who took in the beliefs, but then in some way they went beyond. They discovered something beyond just the beliefs. And if you're looking for examples, I mean, you could think of Saint Francis, I think, in that category. Rumi, the Islamic mystic, Hafez, also in that tradition. Catherine of Siena. There's just that's good for starters. So I put Teresa in that category. So please know that I'm not qualified to talk about Catholicism. I'm not Catholic, and so what we're going to talk about today is not a Catholic teaching in any way. I'm not commenting on Catholicism at all. But just what I know about Teresa's life is, so to me, has been so inspiring and thought-provoking, and so I wanted to share just a little bit about her. She was born in the 1500s in Spain, and if you know history, that was one of the worst times ever to be born in Spain. That was the Spanish Inquisition, and she was right in the middle of it. And her, the Catholics were trying to convert mainly the Jewish and the Muslim populations there, and so her grandparents were actually subjected to that, and they had to convert. They were Jewish, and they converted. And the problem with the Inquisition, that was never good enough for the church. Even if you after you converted, they were so suspicious, and they would persecute you anyway. And that's what happened to her family. It was a rough, rotten time in history. And so Teresa, her mother died when she was 14, and was interesting. Instead of, when many people have a loss like that, they reject God, they're angry at God, and she went the opposite direction. It just put a fire under her, and she ran to God after that. And so much so that she had been reading that God loved martyrs, meaning people who martyred themselves. And so she, at that age, she took her little brother with her, and they went off to fight the Moors in the war. She thought she and her brother would be martyred, and that would be great in the eyes of God. And the family had to send out people to go gather her back. That's how zealous she was. And so that continued until she, at 20 years old, she joined the convent. And that was going good for her until very early in In her life, she got very, very ill. For 3 years, she was mostly paralyzed. She couldn't talk a lot of the time. So if you can imagine being paralyzed and you can't speak, right? So she used to call this the living death for her. And she used this time to go inward in her, because what could she do? She went inward to commune with God, to talk to God, to meditate deeply. And in that time period and the time that she came out of that illness, she had these amazing visions, beautiful, ecstatic visions where she went, she was blissed out for days and weeks and months. And there's a beautiful statue in Spain, a famous statue of the most famous ecstasy she was in. It was called, I think it's called the Ecstasy of Teresa. And if you have a chance, go on YouTube and see this amazing sculpture. It's world famous. So that was her life. And so, but the part I want to stress is during this time, the church in her day had a particular way of practicing and particular techniques, and she found them inadequate for herself. She wanted to go deeper. So she did a few things. She used mantras, which were not part of the tradition, and this is typical of real mystics. She went her own way with this. She didn't stop at the techniques that she was given, and she used little bits of scripture, right? And she repeated them over and over again to bring her into a higher state of consciousness. And that was not part of the scene back then. That was her. What else? She was very. There was a lot of rough. What's the word? They weren't kind to you. If you had a lot of distracted thoughts, it was all about discipline, harsh discipline, in that convent and in the church. And she thought, that's no good. If my mind is distracted, I have to use humor and lightness, lightheartedness, to bring myself back to the thought of God, not this harsh criticism. So she did that. She also did, she used her imagination. This was new in the church too. She went into these long imaginary journeys where she'd be talking to Mary or talking to Jesus or the other saints, and she would get into ecstatic states using her imagination. And if you know about Buddhism and Zen and Hinduism, that's also a technique that they might use too. But keep in mind, this is the 1500s. She had no access to any of these teachings from the East, right? This is all came from her. In other words, when I was talking about mystics earlier, mystics are often taught by God. They don't have access often to the teachers and teachings, as if she had been in India or one of the surrounding countries, she might have access to gurus, to teachers and teachings of this sort. But this was the 1500s in Spain. She knew nothing of any of it, but you could see in her life she was taught directly by God. And when you look at her writings, and there's a lot of writings, because she kept an autobiography, and many of the priests and the nuns who were with her were so moved, so captivated by her, they also had writings confirming a lot of what we know about her. I wrote down some of the quotes because we have a lot of quotes from her. When I was talking about the living death and that 3 years of illness, when she came out, she said, "What can the world offer one after they have tasted death? Nothing delights the soul but the thought of God." So that was her state of consciousness when she came through that illness. And then she has a great sense of humor, you'll see in some of her other quotes, but she says, "This life is only one night at a bad inn." A bad hotel, an inn is a hotel. And I always like that one. Prayer, she says, prayer is nothing else than an intimate sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with God, who we know loves us. And She says, I was taught by the Lord, there is no need to go to heaven to speak to God. He is within you. And that's really at the heart of what she discovered, is that she looked for a God outside of herself, the God of conventional religion. And that's what she looked for, but she didn't find that God. The only God that she found was the God within, the one infinite intelligence, the one infinite power that's manifesting, expressing, emanating as each one of us, every animal, every creature, every living being, and not just our planet, but the whole universe. God, that's what she discovered. That's what her writings show. And that is, if you didn't know she was in this time period, in this tradition, you would think you were reading one of the Hindu writings, or one of the Buddhist writings, or one of the Sufi writings, right? It's the same discovery, she discovered the same truth on her own, the universal truth, right? That's why she is a universal mystic. She's not a mystic just for Catholics, but universal meaning any religion, any spiritual path could identify with what she discovered, right? So which brings me to levitation, right? Which I think I had written on the note that went out to emails. But so during this period, when she was a little older, she would get into a very altered state of consciousness, and it would actually alter the energy and matter in her body, and she would lift up as she was praying. She would lift up off her chair, and this is written about by many of the nuns and priests here, well documented. And I am no scientist, as you know. I don't understand the physics and quantum physics around this. You can see Ray afterwards. He does understand. But anyway, it was a big embarrassment to her. She didn't like the attention. She didn't like the fuss. She didn't want any part of it. So she would have the heavier nuns sit on her legs while she prayed so that she wouldn't lift off. And I love that image. I wish they had made a marble statue of that, because I think that would have been fun to see. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of, she had many devoted followers. Even though she was not a leader, many people followed her, including priests and nuns there. And which is probably one of the reasons she was not killed or jailed, because what she was teaching was not totally in alignment with what was going on in the church that day. And, she got a lot of finger pointing and accused of being influenced by the devil. And you can imagine there was a lot of pushback on her. And she was fine with that. But after a while, when she got a little older, it wore her out. And she retreated from her spirituality, at least outwardly, for a time. And it was only because of a very wonderful priest who would not let her retreat. He just insisted that she had to follow her path fully. And he convinced her to come back. And that's when she found the courage to start her own convent, her own path. And many people followed her. But it was very difficult, and she was very poor. They were all very poor. And there was one scene, this is a famous quote from her life, but she was in a cart, and the cart fell in the mud, and she fell in the mud, and it was kind of at a low point in her life. And she said, she's quoted as saying, God, if this is the way you treat your friends, then I can see why you have so few real friends on earth. So I love that. She really did have a good sense of humor. So when she started her own convent, she had a very important rule. She didn't allow the nuns to wear gloomy faces, sanctimonious, self-righteous, faces, right? She knew that was not the path that she wanted to advocate for. So she insisted that at least once a day, the nuns get together and find something to laugh about, find something to be joyful about. And she says, God, deliver us from gloomy saints. How did those priests ever get so serious and preach all that gloom? I don't think God tickled them yet. What's the Bisaya word for tickle? What is it? Gitik. Ah, okay. It's a new word for me. All right. And then I'm just going to finish up with really her most famous quote, and it's a poem. She says, God alone is enough. Let nothing upset you. Let nothing startle you. All things pass. God does not change. Patience wins all that it seeks. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone is enough. That's one of my favorite little poems. Anyway, thank you all for your kind attention.